and welcome once again to the Progressions of Consciousness radio program. This is Keith David Henry, and we are on the Community Listening Network. We're going to be continuing in our series of the Divine Feminine, and we're going to have a guest for the next two sessions. We'll be speaking with Miss Jill Mattson. Ms. Mattson is an accomplished artist, musician, lecturer, and author. She's a recording artist with numerous CDs using ancient and modern sound healing techniques, and she's also authored several books, and we'll be talking about where to get those books and the work that Jill has been doing. I met Jill. I actually heard her on a program doing an interview with Leah LaChapelle on American Freedom Radio, and I just couldn't resist asking her to be on our show. So we're going to welcome Jill right now. Hello, Jill. How are you?
I'm fine, and thank you for making me feel so comfortable. Thank you.
Well, thank you for feeling comfortable. And we could probably go back and forth with this a few times, kill a few minutes on the program. Thank you so much for joining us, Jill. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself? And I would personally would be fascinated to know how you got into this direction. What made you go in this direction?
Well, when my middle son was 8 years old, he won this contest, and it was really a big deal to everyone, of course, but him, because he was only 8. But he won a contest and got to see Bill Gates. Wow. And he wrote this, at 8 years old, he wrote this essay that he had to in class, and it was Imagine the Magic of the Computer. And what he did was, I had just had another baby, and he and his older brother had to watch the baby when I did the dishes. And this really pissed him off because, the baby was cranky, didn't want to be with them, and they wanted to play computer games. So his essay was to create a hologram of a mommy right outside the playpen, so that when he had to watch his baby brother, he could throw the baby in, start the computer up, and off he'd go. Anyway, we got a lot of attention over this, and later, I stole his idea because I thought it was very kind of funny and creative, and I started to rewrite the Bible. And I rewrote it as like a autobiography, like I was God. And the people were holograms, just like in my son Lee's little essay. So the people were holograms, and I was designing the function key of the computer as universal laws, the very few things like you sow what you reap, which I think through time maintain their trueness. We don't grow and develop. They just work. So in doing this, I had been a very conservative Christian and a very devout Christian. And so started with the Old Testament. I immediately ran into all kinds of problems, like, God liked what one of Cain and Abel, he liked one of the gifts and not the other. Voice. I thought it was kind of mean, and then, God throws Cain out into the multitudes, but as there, what multitudes? And anyway, it seemed like I was always covering for God. And I had like a lifetime epiphany in which I decided that is God this moody, PMS-y kind of person, if you will, as I was reading, or is God love? And I decided that God would be love. And when I read something in the Bible, even, or any place, that was contrary to that I just was going to ignore it. And immediately, this is interesting, after coming to that conclusion, I was clairaudient and clairvoyant immediately.
Wow.
On a dime. It's like I let go of that baggage, of that judgmental baggage, and my life changed. And I couldn't let go of this book because I had spent so long trying to write the Bible. So I started to search for other Bibles. So I went into Greek versions and this version, and then I went into some of the Canaanite stuff, and I'm still looking for, there's got to be some more information where God's loving. And so as I kept on going, I got into the Egyptian stuff, and then I got into the Kabbalah, and I started reading these mystery schools in search for really information about a loving and beautiful God. And I spent 20 years on this. I just went from the ancient Egyptians to the ancient, and then I thought I had tracked Jesus into into India, and seeing how his readings, I began to find a more loving God through this process. But above all, I love music. Ever since I was a little girl, it's like I play or sing or around music, it's like I light up like a Christmas tree. So anytime I would be in any of these ancient schools, esoteric schools that I got into and read all this volumes of information, if I found anything about sound and music, I just wrote it down. It was actually very, very hard to find, because as I read through age after age after age, I discovered that many people in ancient societies believed that sound or vibrations can control civilizations and mass consciousness. And they were very careful to not put this into writing and how this got carried down, because they didn't want it to get in the wrong hands. For example, Hitler was into a lot of esoteric information and looking to use some of this energy and power as well. So anyway, I found that through many of these different organizations, mystery schools, schools of thought, whatever, there would be levels. And for example, one nomenclature would be like initiate, disciple, adept, master. You would have to prove yourself, and they would actually test you before you could go to the next level. And you had to go to a very high level before you'd get information about sound, because it was believed to be such controlling.
Wow.
My thought was, and I don't know for sure, but my thought is that when you look at the actual physical vibrations, like you can get a sound oscilloscope and get a cadaver, a dead body, and stick this sound oscilloscope on your muscles, and you can register the frequency of everything in your body, and you can do it with other ways as well. But when you look at map the frequencies of the physical body, and you can also map the frequencies of emotions, you see that sound is right in there. And if you remember from like fourth grade, when you see a sound wave and you see two of them interacting, how they change each other. Like if the two troughs hit at the same time, the wave doubles in size. Or if a high part and a low part hit, they cancel each other out.
Wow.
So when the sound waves and the waves of our body and the waves of our emotions are so close, I think sound is so powerful because it's like a neighboring vibration. Whereas light affects in thought would be a much higher speed. And not that it doesn't affect us.
So when you say speed, you mean frequency?
Yes, cycles per second of the vibration. So anyway, it was very hard to find this stuff, but I read for 20 years, and I read society after society, and each one, I'm sure, kept the best things hidden, but they would let this piece out, or that piece out, or this piece out. And I ended up with a stack about 15 inches deep on this information. And so being so excited about being in music, I wrote a book on it, and I'm almost finishing my second book.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started to use these principles in my own music and my own composing. So what I did in the book was, after I read all this information, I interviewed some people who are using it today, and was able to document partial scientific proof, or maybe scientific proof of this point and this point, but of not this point and that point. So I gave it some veracity. And I go through all these different schools and all these different sound healers and all these different ways of using tones to change your brain waves, your physical body, your energy, your spirituality. Just use it like a toolbox for everything. And then in my music, I would compose and write music. And again, since I had that experience with my son in that book that I earlier talked about, since I'm clairaudient, sometimes I hear a symphony, sometimes they play through me, sometimes maybe I do it, I don't know. But it's very easy for me to compose. But I started to use the principles of some of these different periods of musical styles, which would be think of it as guidelines for creating frequencies that impact people. And in earlier times, with no cell phones and radars and satellites and microwaves, the vibrations that hit mankind could be very easily controlled, and were, I might say, with conscious design, from what I've read. And so I would use some of these principles in my music, because as we're going to talk in the next hour or so about how these frequency patterns affects cultures and the lessons of mankind, how it affects your thinking and your emotions, you can see that a pattern where I believe that man is incarnating into matter. He's getting closer and closer away from God through the ages, and now he's at a point where he's beginning to evolve back to God. So I thought that you could recreate many of the techniques and frequency patterns when we were closer to God, so that our evolution or a return back could be a quick flight, like getting on a roller coaster and going down a wonderful slide or something, and just having a lot of fun at it. So that's what I've done in my various CDs. I have one called Paint Your Soul, which I believe transport the listener to the level of the soul. And I use techniques from the Middle Ages, and the Middle Ages have copied them from earlier periods. But I have also the frequency patterns of like the Fibonacci series of numbers that God must have used when he created everything, because it's in the sky, it's in our body, it's in flowers, it's in everything. And since it's math, it can be converted to music. And also use these patterns in the chords, so that the chords create that spiral that you see in a seashell. If you were to graph them, and ancient people used to believe that listening to these spirals would transport the listener closer to God.
Wow, I find that extremely fascinating. We're talking with Jill Mattson. She's an artist, musician, and lecturer and author. Her forte, as you can see, is sound and music. You are listening to the Progressions of Consciousness radio program on the Community Listening Network. I'm Keith David Henry. Jill, I find that extremely fascinating. One of the things I find interesting also is the number of people that I'm running into that have had some kind of very religious, mainstream religious background, including myself. As you probably know, I was a minister, a Pentecostal minister at one point, and several other people that I have just recently met within the last year have kind of come from the same background. And I also find the timeline of that 20 years significant, because most of the people that I know that have become what I say more aware of God. None of us have left God, but we become more aware in a different, more expanded way. And one of the things I talk about on my program is getting in touch with the intuition and allowing yourself to experience God from your own unique perspective. So I really appreciate that, because that seems to be exactly what you've done. What I'd like you to do, if you don't mind, Jill, is tell us a little bit about your websites and your books.
Okay.
And your music, of course.
Okay. My primary website is jillswingsoflight.com. Wings of Light was already taken, so it's jillswingsoflight.com. And on there I have my a large cyber art gallery, and I find that my expression in art is very much spirit-driven and inspired as well. And it also has my music, and it has one book, Transformative Power in Sound. And if you order that, I would send you the new remake of the book. It's not on my website yet, but I have a remake of that with some additional information called Ancient Sounds, Modern Healing. And I've got another book coming out in a couple months, and a couple more CDs coming out in a couple months. But I also have my healing music, Paint Your Soul and Your Stardust, on that site as well. I also have another site in which I have some complimentary and free gifts, and I'm so excited about it. I have some sound healing MP3s, one from Paint Your Soul, one from Stardust, and my new CD's coming out. I've put the flower remedies, the Bach flower remedies, in symphony form, and I've also used a sound oscilloscope and been able to come up with the actual frequency of the flower remedy, and so I've been able to embed that vibration right into my symphonies. So it's kind of like a double healing.
Beautiful.
So that's at JillsHealingMusic.com. That's JillsHealingMusic.com. And I think maybe if you'd like, I could go through, start the history of how vibrations in music, I believe, had an impact on civilizations. And then as I get to a civilization that one of my CDs applies to, I could kind of talk about it in context at that point. Would that work?
Excellent.
Okay. Thank you. All righty.
Now you have a few other sites.
Excuse me?
You have a few other websites as well.
Yes, I do.
All right.
But I don't want to confuse people, so how about if we leave it at that?
That's
okay.
Great. All right. Now, you mentioned, when you said it, it kind of jumped out at me. You mentioned healing music. And one of the things that I'm a great enthusiast of particle physics, and I'm also very much into crystals. And many years ago, I started thinking about vibration and sound. And back then the idea was to raise your vibration, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ways I've always done that without realizing it is attaching myself emotionally, mentally, and physically to music, and just watching how that music affected me and how that music changed even my thinking, for instance. And they say that if you play certain kinds of music while babies are still in the womb, that they can hear it, and that it has a fundamental effect on their mental processes. So what I'd like you to do, if you're so inclined, is to talk a little bit about the healing aspect of music and how it relates to the vibration, however, in whatever context you want to speak, the vibration of humans.
Oh, great. Thank you. I want you to think of the electromagnetic spectrum of energy. We're going to start with vibrations or frequencies that we can't hear now, but let's say 1 to 2 cycles per second. We're in like a biomagnetic type of energy. And this is the same kind of frequencies, let's say, of delta brainwaves or deep sleep. Now, anytime you take a frequency and you double it 100%, you get an octave. So if you go to the second octave, now we're talking 2 to 4 cycles per second, you're looking, this is similar to like the bioelectric energy within the body, again, delta wave brainwaves. This is also similar to nerve transmissions. If you take it up a third octave, you get in more of the range of biochemicals, just acids, hormones, enzymes, vitamins, minerals, and again, brainwaves. If you double up another octave, we're now into 8 to 16 cycles per second, you'll find that you have an entire octave of emotions, and also the alpha and some beta brainwaves. You can double that once again, and you come up with 16 to 32 cycles per second, and now you'll find that this vibration is equal to our structural frequencies within our body, so our bones, our muscles, our ligaments. And this is the beginning of our hearing range. These other frequencies are below our hearing range. In octave 6, we go 32 to 64 cycles per second. We're getting into neurophysical frequencies, gamma brain waves. We're looking at nerves, nervous systems, etc. And if you keep going up the spectrum, and you eventually get into the frequencies of light, and so you can in the frequencies of sound. And the reason why I bring up the fact that if you were to look at vibrations just simply increasing in speed, there's phenomena that are so well proven, like octave resonance. Like if you have a violin and it's got a G string and you pluck that, you can see some bad jokes coming.
I was trying to be good, Jill.
Sorry, wrong string. And you have another violin with another G string, and you don't pluck it, it will sound. The G will sound, and it'll happen every time. It's simply that the strong. Or I remember in 4th grade in science class we had this illustration. There was a clock shop, and there was a great big grandfather clock going tick tick tick, and a bunch of little ones going tick 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 tick. And over time, they said that all the ticks would be in line and repeat the exact rhythm of the biggest, loudest clock. And that's just octave resonance. It's like the stronger vibration overcomes the lesser, which has interesting connotations for thinking of thoughts of God, that, the vibrations of God could filter down and overcome the lesser. Anyway, that's an aside. Back to the entrainment. There's also relationships between different intervals, like the interval of a fifth, and also produces a form of octave resonance. And then there are things called harmonics. When you have a single wave, it has like afterwaves. Like if you drop a pebble into the water, you see these circles going out. And we always draw sound on a piece of paper, but it's really in 3D. It's more like you have like a sound, and then it goes out like expanding balls from it. So when you think of that, there's different after sounds, and they have different vibrational patterns, and it happens every time with every sound. And it was a big thing in the Pythagorean mystery school. Anyway, so you have all these relationships between octaves and different intervals in sounds. So when you talk about all the different ways that music can be healing, when you listen to music in our hearing range, there's octaves of it. And the octaves can affect our muscles, our tendons, our hormones, our neurotransmitters. It can affect our bones, our organs, our livers. It can affect our thoughts, our feelings, because they're all octaves. It's like all of sound and vibration is this big matrix. And so what we allow ourselves to hear, it not only goes in our ears, but it also goes in our skin, because deaf people can be very much benefited by sound healing. And so these vibrations affect us on every level. The thing is that we have been so ignorant of the power of these vibrations, and that's why I wanted to go in through the research that I had about sound throughout the ages, because if I could even have you consider that vibrations and sounds has the big impact on an entire civilization, then what will the same vibrations and sounds have on just one wee person? A huge one. And we have the ability with this knowledge and this education to select what sounds we want for health, for emotional health, for evolution, for experiences with God, for everything. So how's that for an answer?
That's a good answer. And I one of the things I wanted to ask you was the information that you just gave me here on this program. Is there a particular book where this information can be found that you've written, or are there several books?
In the new one coming out, I think I have that little piece of information.
Okay, and what is the name of your new book?
I don't have a title for it yet. It'll be out, though, probably, I don't know. The book's done, probably 5 or 6 months before I get it finalized and out.
You should call it "I Don't Have a Title for This Book." No, just kidding.
Works for me.
So why don't you, first of all, I just want to remind our listeners, you're listening to the Progressions of Consciousness radio program on Community Listening Network, and we're speaking with Jill Mattson, who is an accomplished artist, musician, and lecturer and author along the lines, among other things, of music, sound, and vibration and healing. And so far, I'm glued to my microphone here and my speakers. This is an excellent bit of information that's being given to us by Jill. Jill has agreed also to do a second interview with us, so next week we'll be talking to her as well. So, Jill, why don't you tell us about the books that you have already published and where we can get them?
Okay. My book, Transformative Power, Transformative Power of Music, is on my website. And what I've done in that is I've gone throughout the ages and I have read different techniques for using sound in specific to transform your emotions, your health, your energy, and your spirituality. And I do that, the way I organize that book is I go through different people, many of whom are modern people who have brought some type of veracity and scientific proof to portions of these techniques. And I go into how to use them and what they are, and very inexpensive or free ways of using these sound techniques like a toolbox to enhance your life in almost any direction. And it's on jillswingsoflight.com.
Great. Now, you mentioned, the clear audience. I've also been clear audience for quite some time, and the primary manifestation for that for me is that I will often hear very high-pitched sounds. When I say hear, it's kind of hard to describe because I don't hear it in my ear. I hear it in my head. And it's not, people may suggest, well, maybe you have tinnitus or something, but it's not like that. I have to concentrate on it to hear it. I have to turn my attention to hear it. And sometimes I'll hear single tones, but most often than not, I'm hearing octaves, like you mentioned, the pebbles, not just a discrete sound. And sometimes I hear harmonics, depending on what's going on. So you mentioned in a conversation, you mentioned something about the music of the spheres. And I would like you, if you would, to talk about that a bit and tie that into, for instance, sounds that you might hear from crystals, if you are a clairaudient, or the whole idea of the octaves that I suppose are coming from the ethers or the atmosphere. And maybe you can comment on that.
I will comment on that, but I would also like to comment on another thing that you're touching on unknowingly, and that is, throughout the ages, many of the esoteric mystery schools have had their disciples work on expanding their hearing capacities, because they believe that since we're a vibratory being, and once again, sound is so powerful, that if you can increase your hearing, that you can increase your consciousness and your relationship with God. And I know when I first was studying this, I used to think, so you increase your consciousness. But then I watched a tape of some Tibetan monks who were increasing a lady's consciousness, and she also had a huge tumor in her and was dying of cancer. And as they increased her consciousness, that was the sum total of her mind, her body, and her feelings. And one of the byproducts of this process was that they got rid of her cancer. So when you increase your consciousness, it's a very powerful thing. It's like you're taking your overall being in wellness up to another degree. And there was many ways to do this, and I could, again, talk on this forever, but one of the most important was to listen to those little sounds in your head. And for those of you who in the radio audience that aren't hearing it like you are, Keith, if you were to just put the flaps of your ears and kind of close up your ears and just get rid of all other sounds and just pay attention, be aware, give your attention to tiny little sounds inside. Now, you can hear actually your nervous system, it's kind of high-pitched. You can hear your heart going, so you can hear some body sounds. But most people will hear other sounds like you are describing. And even in the Bible, in Revelations, it talks about hearing the sounds of harpers and angels, and they give a listing of different sounds, and I'm sure they're talking about these ancient inner hearing practices. The mystery schools talk about like a process of inner sounds that you can hear, and like, for example, I hear rains, and I hear clouds, and I can hear crickets, and I have this whole potpourri of nature sounds that when I do this I hear. And they say as you evolve and transition, the sounds in your head are going to change. And as you reach enlightenment, they talk about the sound of silence, which of course is full of sound, and none of them reveal what that sounds like. But the fact that you're listening to those little sounds inside is over the ages. It's a time-tested little process that everybody can do with great spiritual progress. And also, I might add that when I do finally get to talking about music throughout the ages, I talk about music with the Lemurians and the Atlanteans, and they talk about their initial music system, where the smallest notes would be, or the two adjacent notes would be 9 of our notes apart. In other words, their notes cover a greater range of this electromagnetic spectrum than we can hear with our ears. So some of the music throughout, this old stuff, I'm assuming that people are hearing the way that you are discussing, that you hear these sounds in your heads. They're not with your outer ears, but you hear them inside. And you can develop that. And in the mystery schools did develop this as a way of coming closer to God. I've heard that the Tibetan monks learned to listen to harmonics. And I read someplace, because I read so much it's crazy. But anyway, I know I'm such a geek, that they could read up to 32 harmonics. They could hear up to 32 harmonics,
wow,
like after vibrations. I mean, I couldn't even imagine that. But that they would do that discipline because they're increasing their connection to God. And so with that caveat, now I'll get back to the music of the spheres, your original question. Okay, music of the spheres is written about in all of these different ancient esoteric societies. And there's nothing really hard and fast on it. So the secrets vary from mystery school to mystery school, but my take on it is that there is music, and that music is creation, and that it is math, and that as I go through these different patterns and the different things that affect civilizations and cultures, you could see how perhaps higher developed beings could allow the Earth civilizations to go through different learning periods and different epics and different eras where lessons are learned, and that could be spurred by the music of the spheres. And I'm just playing here with my imagination.
Right, sure.
Yeah, that music above our hearing range could come down and have a huge impact on us individually, and also as a population. And in regards to your question about crystals amp up sounds. I found in antiquity that they would often use crystals. They would use the point of the crystal, and they would sing into the bass, and they would use it to amp up sounds. Now, if you sing like in a glissando, which is a musical term for, I don't know, kind of sounding like a siren, like, ooh. If you sing like in a glissando, like that, into the base of a crystal, you'll find you get to one note where it's louder than all the rest. And that'll be the vibratory sound of that crystal.
So that's a harmonic, would you say? Or a resonance, rather.
I would say a resonance.
That's the word, yeah.
Yeah, it's a resonance, and so perhaps each crystal is a phoneme or a sound, and they could be combined as a language. I'm just using my imagination again.
Well, Einstein did say imagination is more important than knowledge, so.
Then I'm in like Flynn.
Oh, that's funny. I don't know if you had finished developing that, but I did want to move on to another question.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Now, I want to make sure that we have plenty of time in this interview to talk about the sound throughout the ages and the history of music in civilization. So we will hit that. But I wanted to hit something that I believe is probably related, and I'm sure you're familiar of the HARP experiments that they're doing.
Could you talk about them for our readers?
Yeah, well, HARP is actually, it's an ultra-low frequency, supposedly weather experimentation facility, and I know much better than that, and that to a great extent, there have been experiments involving controlling people's moods by projecting these ultra-low frequency waves and literally controlling groups of people by the projection of these waves, bouncing them off the ionosphere and targeting them at groups of people. And based on some of the information that you shared today, it becomes, just extremely clear how easily one could influence a person's emotions by messing around with that ultra-low frequency range. So I don't know how much you know about HARP, but whether you do or not, if you could relate what you were talking about the, controlling people to such an instrument, which of course I don't know if the listeners are familiar with that, but basically HARP is an outgrowth of technology that was developed by Nikola Tesla. Of course, he didn't design it to control people, but it's been used among many other things just for that purpose. So if you could speak on that, Jill, I would appreciate it.
Sure. Back to the wisdom of all the people throughout the ages who hid this sound information. It was hidden so that could not happen. I recently read a book by a Dr. Robert Becker, who's a scientist who had done a lot of experimentation on very low-level electromagnetic frequencies. His belief and his books are on the evolution of the species of mankind and the transportation of frequencies throughout an animal or a being. And he says that through the earlier evolution, that electromagnetic frequencies are the method of communication within an organism, like a low-level electromagnetic. He says as the being evolves and gets more advanced, you'll find nervous systems developing, and that has more of a digital, a very fast, kind of like our high-tech computers, really can send a lot of information. Not as accurate.
So if I'm understanding you, what you're saying is that the organs within the body communicate with each other using specific frequencies of sound.
Absolutely. And what I'm saying is through the work of Dr. Becker, he's saying that as we evolved, we started communicating with these low-level electromagnetic frequencies like you're describing with HARP. And his book says that the perennial tissue system, which is tissue that surrounds each and every nerve in your body, transfers these low-level electromagnetic analog frequencies. He believes that that's where consciousness is communicated throughout the body, and he believes that that is the most important communication system in the body, and that the nervous system is a digital versus an analog, and it is much more powerful in terms of getting more frequencies out faster, but the analog perennial tissue system is a very, very powerful, low-level controlling, he believes, the most controlling force in the human. the ancient societies, and I'm getting a little bit out of order, but the ancient societies in throughout history, they talk about playing the stars. And what they're talking about is this very same electromagnetic energy coming in from the stars. The planets in our solar system, as they move, they create waves, just like when you see a boat in the ocean, it has waves behind it. So these planets are big, they're moving around, they create waves. They come in as very low-level electromagnetic energy. And that's why, like in the Bible, the wise men were astrologers. Because throughout history, people are managing the electromagnetic energy that comes in through our sky and also through the earth, I might add. And I'll get into that, but how they changed the system, and I've done that in one of my CDs. I've worked with that type of energy for positive purposes, I might say.
Which CD, what is the title of that particular CD?
Stardust.
Okay.
But they used music to counterbalance these energies. And how can I put this? I want you to think of an octave, one octave, and I want you to superimpose it on a color wheel. So now think of a color wheel in your mind. You've got red, orange, so forth. And you've got these different colors. And I want you to think of like A, B, C, D, E, also arranged on this color chart. Now, if you were to go to the actual color of, let's say, blue light, and take it down octaves, you're going to have, blue's going to be a G sharp. And if you do this with the different colors, you will find that our musical system fits perfectly onto a color chart. So an interesting phenomenon exists with complementary colors. When you visualize this color chart, they're right across the wheel. But they also kind of like have a balancing effect. They kind of, it's like if you're deplete in, let's say, D, if you go across, that's an orange, you go across the color chart, you'll find blue, and that's a G sharp. You'll find that you'll be attracted to music in G sharp, or perhaps an individual who resonates G sharp. At any rate, there's these attractions and these imbalances. Also, with each frequency, for example, a G sharp, it's going to resonate with emotions. It's going to resonate specifically with enzyme production and your digestion process. And so these different frequencies resonate with different areas of the body. So you can see as the electromagnetic energies come in from the skies, astrology, they would have an influence on our health and our emotions, and that's what astrology is all about. They say, you're a Capricorn, and you have problems with digestion. You might have, they'll give you these challenges and these strengths in terms of your body and in terms of your personality. And so that's what the ancient music was all about. It was healing and benefiting and blessing people so that they could go through these challenges easier. But I might say, it doesn't sound like harp is doing this to bless people through these challenges.
No, I would think not.
But can they control? Yes. I recently read an article about the U.S. Navy, I believe it was, that was doing something similar to what you're describing this harp as. They were testing these low-level frequencies as a weapon. And, they came up with, I don't know, it sounded like some garbagey reason, but they were testing them in the Pacific oceans, and there was something like 42 whales that were beached, and they blew up the brains.
Wow.
And in another experiment, I believe it was right after World War II, there was a French scientist, his name was Gauffrand, and talk about imagination. He was interested to see what would be the impact of making the loudest, most obnoxious sound he could. I mean, can't you imagine a person like that?
The Ministry of Strange Sounds on the Mighty Pythons, it sounds like. Almost.
Yes. So anyway, he constructed this 6-foot police whistle because he thought that was just the most terrible thing. He was not in the building when it went off, but what I've read was that the technician was immediately died.
Wow.
And upon autopsy, his organs had jellied.
Wow.
And also, a lot of the information of Gavron, from what I read, was confiscated by the French government.
Hmm.
So I guess that gives a lot of power to what the potential of what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of this stuff is documented, and people by and large are not aware of these things, mainly because they're misrepresented in the media of what they're for. But I think also people are they just have a hard time thinking that their government would experiment upon them this way, but that type of thing is so well documented. And, there's no reason for people to feel vulnerable and thinking, oh my God, what do we do? Because we have things like music, and we have things like crystals, and we have things like, some of the things you've been talking about that are healing elements that we can use to counteract the effects of things like HARP. And we don't really have to be worried about these things because these are artificial. And the energies that are already within us and the energies that we have access to by virtue of being human and by virtue of developing our consciousness are much more powerful than these external tools that are being used against us. But if you're kept from being aware of these tools, and a lot of this prohibition is actually created by religions to keep people from getting in touch with these very, very powerful facilities that God has provided to keep us healthy, regardless of what some unscrupulous group might try to do. And for years and years, I've been involved with crystals for healing purposes and for enlightenment purposes and for raising vibrations, personal vibrational levels for spiritual unfoldment or enlightenment, if you will. And I find I feel a great sense of vindication for my views over the years just by listening to you today, because although a lot of these things I just knew intuitively without being able to put them into words, you've helped me in that you've allowed me now to apply science, which is a great love of mine, to the disciplines of esotery, which I've embraced for quite some time. I want to remind everyone you're listening to the Progressions of Consciousness radio program on the Community Listening Network. I'm Keith David Henry, and we're talking with Jill Mattson, accomplished artist, musician, lecturer, and author. And we're going to right now get into the history of music and civilization.
Oh, wait a minute. One more thing while you were talking. I was just thinking of an ancient technique that's incredibly powerful, and it's very free. It's in my my Transformative Power book on my website. But let me tell you, so you can all do it. One of the ways of balancing the frequencies in your body is to simply tone them out. It's an ancient process, and it's so easy. You just sound like a siren, like, oh. You sound a little catty, but if you kind of make those sounds, it's like you can balance out the influence of outside vibratory influences. And the process was revived by Laura Elizabeth Keyes, I believe about 40 or 50 years ago, and she has numerous books about healing people to a great extent with that process. It's called toning. And she would imagine that the tone would come up to the bottom of your feet, and she would allow the tone. It's like you don't force the tone. The tone will move when it's ready. And when you have a blockage in your body, in your subtle energy channels, the tone won't go up. So you can start low, like ah, and then sometimes the voice will crack or stop. So you just kind of stay there. And I find in my imagine, I go right and left, let the body find its own natural pattern. And it might take me 15 minutes, half hour, but eventually I'll go through that. And you can go through your body. You can get rid of energy blocks. You can harmonize out things such as influences from that harp that you described. The other thing, I hope you like this, is it's just a I get these flashbacks, and sometimes I'm seems like I'm someplace else, and I've gotten this flashback before where I perceive, and again, perhaps my imagination, I'm back in Atlantis, and I see this crystal room, and I see these people in robes, and there's someone being healed in the center, and I see these healers in shapes in a circle that if you were to draw lines between them, you would be making sacred geometry shapes.
Wow.
So they're very concerned about the angle, and then they have crystals, and they're singing into the base of them. And there's somebody in the center who is being healed. And so that you could do this, in fact, I have some of my workshops. I've done this toning process where you get and you create a sacred geometry shape around an individual, and people tone into the base of a crystal and go up and down that body. And it's absolutely wild how powerful it is, and the kind of comments you get.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm getting so much out of this interview. We have approximately 6 or 7 minutes left in the program, and as I said, we will be having you back again next week. So don't feel the need to jam anything in, but what I would like you to do is perhaps give just a synopsis or an introduction to the idea of history of music and civilization, or as you say, sound throughout the ages, and leave enough time where you can tell us a bit about your, repeat about your websites.
Okay. Well, what I found for reading these different mystery schools or esoteric schools of thought, that they would tell about their musical system. And I found that when a civilization went under and changed, like let's say the Greeks fell from power, for example, that the music would change. And that I found this pattern reoccurring throughout civilization and civilization. And when you look at the collective picture of how the vibrations that they are exposed to, you can see that you can change different things that will perhaps change your mental and emotional experiences. And so when I go through this, you can see little techniques that you can use in your own life, to bless yourself and to bless others. It's very powerful. Though I'm not going to get into it now because it'll take a whole session. And also, you wanted to get into masculine and feminine energy in music as well, but I suppose that's for another day as well.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that in the next program. I find it very interesting that when I was, I guess, maybe 18, back when the dinosaurs were still roaming the earth, I got very much into music, and I was very aware of how the music was literally changing me, how it was affecting my senses.
It will.
And I thought it was very interesting that when I started getting involved with Christianity, which was near my post-adolescence, one of the things that was stressed was that you should abandon certain types of music because it was of the devil or it was evil. And I could totally understand it because the sound of the music and the progressions of the music and the mixtures of the notes and the octaves of the notes were so different than a lot of the music that was traditionally held as good music, to where I could really see how people could actually be afraid of it because it sounded so different and because it had such a profound effect on their psyche and on their physical bodies. So perhaps you could spend a minute or two just talking about that.
Sure. Well, first of all, let me go back into the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church would have been in charge of the music. The governments in antiquity, the government controlled music. It's just a recent idea that people get to pick for themselves. But as the Catholic Church throughout the Middle Ages combated or competed with paganism, one of the elements of paganism with Pythagoras, mystery school and so forth, was the idea of the harmonic philosophy and how music and harmony in God and nature impacts us. Remember when I told you about the opposing tones in a color wheel and how there's a kind of a magical relationship about complementary colors or complementary tones?
Yes.
How that they're attractive, but they're also healing. Like if there was a doctor in the 1920s or 40s, something like that. His name was Royal Rife, and he created this frequency machine. And again, reading his books or books about him, he was able to cure 800 out of 800 out of cases of cancer.
Wow.
And he did it by identifying the actual frequency of the cancer, and then like let's say you were to have a frequency of 10, then he'd expose you to the frequency of 1 over 10. He'd cancel it out. Or let's say it was plus 10, he'd give you minus 10. And so that frequency relationship, where you kind of can cancel each other, something like that, out, is also the same kind of relationship that you'll find in a complementary color. Interesting, throughout the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church used to call diabolus in musica, or devil in music. It was it banned the interval of a half octave. And it was almost, and I guess I can't say this, but I have read this, that they were saying that the Catholic Church was promulgating like a franchise where only the faithful could be healed through God at their church.
Interesting.
And so they very much discouraged the study of self and nature. And with that, there was they banned that healing interview. And by the way, I believe today it is still banned in the Catholic Church.
Wow. Okay, we're just about out of time. You're listening to the Progressions of Consciousness radio program on the Community Listening Network, and we're speaking with Jill Mattson. And Jill, why don't you tell us a little bit about your websites?
Thank you. Jill's Wings of Light. I have my artwork, which is simply an octave of music, and has many of which have been very spiritually inspired. I have my music, and I have CDs, and I have also I have books. I have a YouTube site as well with some information and some lectures. It's Wings of Light, I believe, is my YouTube tag. And I have a complimentary sound healing newsletter and free sound healing MP3s, and that's at www.jillshealingmusic.com.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. This is Keith Henry, the Progressions of Consciousness radio program. Jill will be back with us next week. Until then, have a good day.